Hey, I'm Candice Kaylor, and I am in Dr. Fuller's English Lit class, and this is my take on T.S. Eliot, literate and scholar. Thomas S. Eliot changed the face of poetry. Some say he's the most celebrated poet of his era. The Nobel Prize winning poet is credited with viewing the world as it appears without optimistic judgment. He was considered a prophet of doom. His works exude the frustration that he seemed to have with mankind. It was once said how unpleasant to meet Mr. Eliot was because of his cynical views of man's accomplishments. He was said to be a pessimist who prophesies doom for mankind. Eliot's grandfather was William Greenleaf Eliot. He was a Unitarian clergyman. He founded a Unitarian church in St. Louis and then went on to establish 3 schools: a poor fund, a sanitary commission, and most well known for founding Washington University in 1872. Eliot, like his grandfather, was convinced that one's purpose in life was to build enduring structures and institutions to serve humanity. Thomas Sterne Eliot was born in St. Louis in 1888. He received the best education from schools in the United States and in Europe. He spent summers in his family's home in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and regardless of where he lived, he considered himself a New Englander. Eliot's mom was not comfortable around infants, so during his early years he was looked after by a nurse. Although he was Unitarian, his nurse exposed him to services in the Roman Catholic Church to which she attended or belonged. Eliot was confirmed in the Anglican Church in 1927, the year he became a British subject. Eliot received his classical education at Smith Academy in St. Louis, and in preparation for his entrance to Harvard in 1906, he attended Milton Academy in Massachusetts. Once at Harvard, he completed his bachelor's degree in 3 years. He remained there from 1909 to 1914 as a graduate student in English and philosophy. After Harvard, Eliot planned to travel the continent. Off he went to Germany, to the Sorbonne in France, and Oxford in England to study literature. While at the Sorbonne, he found inspiration from writers such as Dante and Shakespeare, and also from ancient literature, modern philosophy, and Eastern mysticism. Eliot was a pretty tall guy, measuring 5'11". He was considered handsome and slender, although he stooped and looked sad-eyed. Even though he was still an excellent fit for British life, meticulously dressed and polished. He met Ezra Pound, a publisher who helped many poets publish their works in 1914. Eliot, while in England, met several English girls and was drawn to them for their different looks, manners, accents, numerous things. One girl caught his eye. Her name was Vivian Hay Wood. They soon married without informing their parents in June of 1915. He visited the United States only occasionally after that. The marriage was not a success. His wife's neurotic behavior caused Eliot to stress out, and he later checked himself into a Swiss sanitarium in 1921. He stayed for 2 months, and once out, he gave Ezra Pound the manuscript entitled The Wasteland, his most famous work. The poem deals with the question of human alienation and estrangement in the post-World War I era. A series of related sections, Search for the Holy Grail, depicts humankind's mankind's greed and lust and its need for desire and redemption. The destruction of lost in human life was a real issue for Eliot. He talks of death being an all-powerful force that cannot be escaped by anyone or anything. The absence of water indicates death. Each dreary scene holds and gives a description of a dry and barren land that offers no protection. When water is mentioned in a flashback of past life showing meaning and happiness, in the other context, water is directly mentioned with death. This leaves readers to feel helpless when controlling their own life paths, reiterating once again Eliot's writing of impending doom. He sees all great things will crumble. Themes of life without love, instability in life, and premature end of life he felt were all necessary for life to exist. In his writing, he states, until death occurs, rebirth and transformation cannot take place. It is just very difficult for a reader to accept death as a necessity. And this is also the way the world felt after the war. The Wasteland was considered the first modern poem in English in the 20th century. During Eliot's most productive period, he was a teacher, a bank employee, and for more than 30 years, a member of the publishing house of Faber and Greer, and after 1929 known as Faber and Faber. All of the above limited his writing to about 3 hours a day. After settling down in a steady job, he wrote his first poem, The Love Song of Alfred Prufrock, in 1915. Said to be one of his more approachable poems since it takes fewer risks than his later poem. The poem was based on the persona of Prufrock himself. Prufrock has an inability and refusal to address inadequacies that he sees both in himself and society. Eliot shows this through the complex persona of Prufrock and emphasizing repetition. Prufrock is in part a shallow conformist. Everything is neat and precise to him. But then he turns it around to say, Prufrock is aware of the shallowness of society to which he conforms. Prufrock is a loner. He does not want to approach society nor confront himself. He is defeated by his knowledge and his inadequacies, and states in the poem, and in short, I was afraid. It repeated that Prufrock felt he was insignificant and more absorbed in the judgment of others and not concerned with his actual worth as an individual. With World War II approaching, Eliot wrote more poetry than drama, reflecting the personal religious conflicts he experienced. Ash Wednesday in 1930 expressed some concerns he had about the acceptance of religious belief and about the discipline such belief require. More writings to follow were Burnt Norton in 1936 and the first poem of Four Quarters in 1943, which also contained East Coker in 1940, Dry Savages in 1941, and The Gidding in 1942. Poems also reflected his own past and human past. Each of the 4 poems is autonomous and collectively make a statement about human mankind and the philosophical and anthropological impact. Eliot separated from his wife in 1932. Her health mentally and physically deteriorated through the years, and she died in 1947. Some of his works depicted emotional difficulty from his marriage. Eliot received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1948. The same year, he received the Order of Merit from King George VI. By that time, Eliot was considered the most important poet in English, writing in English. In 1957, he married Valerie Fletcher, who he'd worked with at Faber and Faber for 8 years. Valerie was his soulmate. She understood and appreciated his work. In their 8 years together, she brought more delight and joy into his life than he'd ever experienced in his whole lifetime. T.S. Eliot died January the 4th, 1965.